Hello everyone, so during this video today it's time to put the pencils away and turn this dragon drawing into, well, a sculpture made out of clay.
Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well, and thank you for tuning into Moose Motion. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed the content, comment below what you think, share with your friends, and perhaps consider subscribing if you're new, and be sure you have your post notifications turned on so you don't miss any of the new content. Anyway, thank you for your support, it's highly appreciated.
So during this video, to be a little more precise as to what we're making exactly, it's going to be the stop motion frame or the armature doll frame for the dragon, which is essentially just a skeleton of the, well, doll or object or organic object, or in this case mythical creature that it is you're making. And usually I like to use aluminum wire because it works fairly well for stop motion purposes, because it's still fairly soft for metal and not too hard like steel, and is good at holding weight and will help save weight. Speaking of saving weight, we're going to use some aluminum foil here for basically the big parts of the body, which includes the ribcage as well as the hips, just to kind of help save weight as well as, well, save on clay. Kind of helps you save a little bit of money in the long run too, and then tie it all together with tape so our tinfoil doesn't come undone. Now it's time to move on to the joint connections for the dragon, and well, usually I just kind of use hoops of wire for the hips as well as the front legs, but in this case it was a little bit more intricate, mainly because, well, this thing obviously has a pair of big set of wings. So what I decided to do for the front leg attachment in particular, instead of doing, well, just one single hoop and then hooping in the wings with it, causing an extra point for, well, breakage, I decided to basically just include the wings in its entire loop and just tie it off at the top and then kind of, well, keep it all one piece. It is kind of a little bit to deal with because you have now these massive wire wings to work with the entire time, but overall I think it's probably going to help with the design and make it a lot stronger overall and not have, well, breaking, falling wings off, because to be honest, stop motion wings are never really that fun to begin with, so anything I can make my life a little bit easier in the animating process, may as well do now. Normally I give you a more detailed description on how the actual main hip joints and, well, front leg or arm joints kind of work on these things, but unfortunately I figured it's probably a little more important to kind of disclose the wings because that's slightly different on this project in comparison to some of my others. And well, if you'd like more of a tutorial on how to make the hips, be sure to check out the links in the post description. In the meanwhile, we're going to throw this thing in the oven for about 13 minutes at, well, 275 degrees Fahrenheit or 135 degrees Celsius. And then once it's out of the oven and it's cooled down a little bit, add a little bit of plasticine to the, well, main joints of the legs, because they're going to be flopping around otherwise, because they're just kind of attached by rings, and it's kind of annoying trying to build a skeleton with floppy legs, in my personal opinion as well as experience. Once the legs are basically kind of in place, well, enough to not flop around basically, enough to hold their own weight, time to add the little oven-baked bones for the legs. Now the important part here is to basically just leave a small enough gap in between the armature wire there so there's enough room for actual movement, and the same logic applies to the wings here, just on a much larger scale. Now some of you might be a little concerned about, well, me throwing the dragon skeleton in the oven multiple times. Now basically I use a kind of expensive brand of clay called Sculpty Clay. By no means am I sponsored by them, unfortunately. However, it is a great product and I definitely do recommend using it because you can bake this stuff kind of multiple times without it ever really cracking. You will burn it eventually. It does have quite high resistance though, so you can throw it in the oven multiple times. Just do be careful, especially for perhaps someone who is using, well, material that might be more prone to cracking. You might want to do all of this stuff in one go as opposed to breaking it down into different segments like I'm doing. I just find it a lot easier and more manageable, because that way you're not really worried about smushing, say, your body parts right now. It gives me a place to anchor my hands, essentially. And once all the plasticine is removed off the joints, you're ready to throw it in the oven one more time, and, well, probably a slightly more reduced time frame, perhaps about 10 minutes, I would say, is more appropriate, because, well, it generally depends on how thick your clay is, and, well, given the fact that basically the other layers are already cooked and we're cooking with thinner layers on the wings and small bones, it only probably needs about 10 minutes or so, maybe even 9, but I give it about 10 just to kind of make sure things are safe, and a little more cooked than undercooked is always better, mainly because, yeah, it will crumble otherwise. Now we're on to, well, basically straightening up the joints here a little bit, or the tail most importantly, because, well, it's a lot easier to split this off after the fact everything's been kind of put together, and, well, usually with tails and thinner objects like the neck here as well. When it comes to having 2 loops of wires, it's a little too stiff for stop motion purposes, so it's always easier to just kind of bring it down to 1 because it's just less fixing during the animation process and more focusing on the actual filming. Because ultimately you want more maneuverability out of those parts. They're not exactly holding up, well, the weight of the doll like the spine is, so having 2 loops of wire there makes a lot more sense as opposed to, well, the parts that are going to be moving around a lot and not exactly holding any weight. Now, we're going with a slightly different foot or hand design in this case, as opposed to my normal one. I know it's a little strange kind of seeing just a pair of balls on the end right now, but basically the idea is I've had some issues with my Allosaurus in the background there with his fingers having wires inside them and them being really tiny. It's just a little too hard to move them around, so I'm basically going to just have balls on the end of the feet and use the fingers as just pure plasticine so I can move them around quite easily and not have to worry about resculpting during the filming process. I will see how it works out in the end, but it's kind of experimental and, well, I'm learning along with you guys as I go here. So now we're on the skull, and, well, there isn't too much to really give you on, well, how to make one of these other than a bunch of shaping and adding in tiny little bone pieces. Some of these details might not necessarily be very necessary to a degree because, well, most of it's getting covered with plasticine. However, it's just kind of like an added detail I usually take a lot of pride in and makes it a lot more, well, realistic in the long run, kind of having an accurate skull in my opinion. So, now that the skull is all kind of wrapped up, it's time to move on to the build rundown / beauty shots. Now, obviously, this dragon is going to be a reinterpretation of the drawing that I did of it earlier on in, well, this dragon series so far. And if, well, you made it this far in the video and by chance are new and haven't actually seen the dragon drawing yet, you can kind of see the legs in the background. But I suggest you go check out the actual sketch. That way you have an idea what this dragon's going to look like once it's totally fleshed out. For now, it's just kind of the skeleton, because unfortunately that's kind of all I had time for this week. Unfortunately, I did kind of get sick over the weekend, and it was just not capable of doing, well, voiceover work. It would have sounded very snotty, and I just didn't want to do that to anyone, because, yeah, it would have sounded pretty gross, and was just not a lot of fun. It was best to just kind of get a little bit more rest, and post on a later date. So, next time we'll be finishing off the skeleton, adding that lower jaw, obviously, can be a bit of a pain in the butt sometimes, so that's kind of why I didn't, unfortunately, do it this week. So that's a future me problem, and a few more skeleton details, and then adding the plaster scene, so that should be fun, so be sure to tune in, and if you made it this far in the video, be sure to leave a like and comment below what you think of the project so far, and share with your friends, and be sure to subscribe if you're new. Anyway, that's enough from me. Till next time, take it easy.